Today is October 24th, 2004, and we are in Belton, Missouri at the house of Ray and Gina Guin, and Pat Mays, Margaret, and Gary Lee are all present, and I'm Gina Lee. This is Ray Guin. Okay. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Okay. Where were you living at the time?
A little farming town in Arkansas called Lepanto.
What service branch did you go into?
I'm sorry?
What service branch?
I went into the Air Force.
Oh.
Actually, I went to join the Army, but the Army recruiter was out of town, so I joined the Air Force while I was there.
What was your training like? What did you have to do?
We did, obviously, the things that you see military do. We did marching and close order drill. We did physical training. We did weapons familiarization, Air Force history, and drill and ceremony type things. Mostly pulling people together to work together so that everybody were doing the same thing, and consequently we came as a group of people from all over the country, and we became a cohesive unit before we finished.
Which wars did you serve in?
2, Korea and Vietnam.
What was it like when you first arrived at both those places, and how were they different, or were they like?
Well, when I first arrived in Korea, it was exciting. I arrived the day that I arrived in Busan. My railhead at my unit, which was on up the island, blew up and blew up everything around it, and so I got in on some really exciting time of putting it back together. We were a ammunition supply unit, and a train load of bombs blew up on my railhead.
So what was your job or your assignment?
My job at that particular time was making sure that the equipment that we used to haul bombs kept going. We kept the vehicles and that running, and as I said, our function there was to haul bombs. We would take them off a boat, put them out in a revetment, and then when they were needed by the flying units, we put them on a train or on trucks and shipped them to them.
What's your most memorable experience?
My most memorable experience probably was that first day getting there and finding out that my entire railhead, where my shop was located, had I been there, had been blown up that day that I hit the island. That was something that we gave a lot of thought to, making sure that it didn't happen again.
Did you receive any medals or citations?
Yes, in fact. Do you want to hear the ones that I received?
Yeah, definitely.
I received the Air Force Commendation Medal, the Meritorious Service Medal, Army Good Conduct Medal, National Defense Medal, Korean Service Medal, Air Force Longevity Medal, United Nations Service Medal, Vietnam Service Medal, Vietnam Campaign Medal, and 2 Presidential Unit Citations.
Were you ever injured?
Not seriously injured, no.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
I wrote them a letter once or twice a month. In fact, that was my prime and only means of communication, was by letter, and I didn't write to them nearly often enough. I think my mother wrote to my commander to see if I was still there once when I hadn't written in a while. But
Was the food good?
the first few months in Korea, our food was sea rations. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of sea rations, but they came in a little box about like this. and they were dried, and you know, they'd have a little can of fruit, a little can of beans, a little can of meat, and was it good? No, it was terrible. Absolutely terrible. But that's all we had. We built a dining hall and probably finished that by the time I'd been there 6 months. And then we started eating cooked food. And it probably wasn't very good, but it seemed great.
How did people entertain themselves?
Well, before we built the dining hall, we built a little club, and people played cards, people drank beer, I guess. Really, we didn't have a lot of time for entertainment. That first few months when we were rebuilding our railhead, we worked 12-hour shift during the day, and then at night we'd haul gravel and stuff for rebuilding. So we didn't really have a lot of time for entertainment. I guess we entertained ourselves. We managed to. We played a lot of cards and this type of thing.
Did you have any R&R?
Yes, I did.
Where'd you go for how long?
From Korea, I went on R&R to Japan. I went for 5 days, just about the middle of my tour, and it was quite enjoyable. It was back in that world where things were a little bit different, you know. It was Japan was at that time much more modernized than Korea. Even though I thought they were very primitive at that time, they were quite different.
Were there any humorous or unusual events that you remember happening?
Any humorous or
unusual events?
Oh gosh, I'm sure there were numerous humorous events. Yeah, I picked up and delivered Korean workers, and I had actually it was a dump truck, but a long what was called 6x6 dump truck, and I hauled these Korean workers out to the towns where they lived, little villages, and then when I'd come back, my truck would be full of people. People would, when I'd have to slow down, people would jump in the back of my truck. And I'd get to the bridge, crossing the little river there, and I'd pull the dump thing and people would start getting off. And they didn't think that was too funny, but at the time I did. I unloaded them. But, you know, there were things that probably were funny to me then that wouldn't be now, and quite frankly, it just seemed like looking back at it now, it's almost like a blur. You know, I was there, I went home, it was over. Mm-hmm. And when I went to Southeast Asia, we skipped there because you asked me about both. We were again a support unit. We supported the flying the fighters and bombers, and when I arrived there, it was just, you know, you move to a new place, you do a new job. My job was I was in charge of all the aircraft fuels and fueling and all the equipment, so it was pretty exciting. The most exciting thing there was I got to my hooch one day and heard the sirens going off, and I looked back up towards the center of the base, and I saw there was a fire there. And about that time my phone rang, and they told me that there was a fire in one of my fuel pits down there. And we had bladders, big 50,000 gallon rubber bladders that we stored fuel right there at the runway. So as I jumped back in my truck and started back over there, people were running just as fast as they could go to try to get over there. And each time I passed one of them, I'd yell out the window or yell at them that that was a fuel fire, and it was 50,000 gallon bladders, and they were turning around going just as fast as they could the other way. And so that was fairly humorous.
What did you think of the other soldiers? Did you get along with them?
It's just like people anywhere. The majority of people you get along with. Some you don't get along with quite as well as others, but being a nice, easygoing, gentle person that I am, most of the people you get along with. You can't, I don't get along with everybody in Belton. I try to, but there's some stubborn people here or something. And it's like that, just like a normal society. You have people that are just easy to get along with, and you have some that a little more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Did you keep a journal or a diary at all? Were you allowed to?
No, I didn't. I stored it all here, and this computer's wearing out, I'm telling you.
Do you remember the day that your service ended?
Do I remember the day my service? Absolutely.
Where were you at?
Richards Air Force Base. I came back from overseas and came to Richards to retire. And where I was at the time of my retirement, I was over in Kansas at a car show. My first job for a few months after I retired was selling cars, and they were having a new car show the day I retired. So the guy asked me if I could go to work that day so I could participate in, going to see the new car show. I said, sure. So I went out to the base and I told the man that I'd be by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon to pick up my retirement papers and all that. He said, oh, you can't do that. We're having a retirement parade. There's 6 guys retiring. We're having a retirement parade. You got to be there. And I said, I won't be there. And he said, you have to. And I said, what are you going to do if I'm not? Kick me out? And he said, well, that's probably a good question. Maybe you don't have to be there. So that's what I was doing at the time my retirement became official.
Were you excited to come back from Korea?
Where I came back from to retire, no, I wasn't. I probably would have liked to stayed another year or so, but I decided to retire. And by the time I woke up, it was too late. I was back in retirement. I was in England, and I loved it there. I'd say that even if my wife wasn't British, I still loved it there. So, it was nice to be home, but it wasn't anything of consequence. We'd been here before. We'd been there before. Pardon me.
Did you make any close friends while you were?
Yes, in fact, I did.
Do you still talk to them?
Some. In fact, I went downstairs to check something on my computer, check my email. Was that yesterday or day before when I came up with that picture? Anyway, a couple days ago, a friend that I met in 1955 lives in Boston. When my daughter Pat was a baby, he thought she was the greatest thing since sliced bread, so he took pictures of her over and over. Took them in those little frame things. I don't know what do you call them, slides. And he'd sent me quite a few of them, but I went down to check my email and turned it on, and there was a letter there from Bill, and I popped it up, and it was a picture of he and my little girl, my little 1-year or 11-month-old daughter, and there's others. We had some friends that lived on base with us last time we were in England that we still correspond with. The majority, we've kind of over the years lost touch, but I know where they are, a few of them, but 21 years, the number of people you meet, it's certainly just a number of people you met that you keep in contact with, even though they were good friends.
How did your service and your experiences in the war affect your life afterwards?
Well, good question. I think my management training, supervisory training that I received in the military probably was of value to me when I got out into the world. I'm sorry about this cough, but I can't get rid of it.
It's all right.
I went when I retired. Like I said, I sold cars for a few days, or a couple of months, but then a person that I had worked part-time for down when I was here, I'd worked one Christmas season or something, called and offered me a job, a management job, so I took that. About a year later, that company went bankrupt and out of business, and it wasn't my fault. I didn't have anything to do with that, but then I wound up with I worked for another company for 5 or 6 years, and then I started my second career. I became a Kansas City mail carrier, and I didn't like that too much. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it was all the weather and all that stuff. So my supervisor asked me why I didn't go into management. I thought that was a terrific idea. So I went into management. I became a part-time supervisor here, and then I shipped over to East Missouri and became a superintendent of postal operations. And then I became a postmaster, and then I retired again. So yeah, I think my military training certainly affected my career choices and the things that happened within those careers.
Do you attend reunions? Ever? Do you attend reunions?
I have not. Once in a great while, I still see an ad in Air Force Times about my old 543rd Ammunition Supply Company or squadron holding a reunion somewhere, but it's usually on the West Coast, and no, I have not.
So did your training prepare you for the war?
Not specifically, because we were trained more as a support unit, as support units. And before I went to Vietnam or to Southeast Asia, actually I was stationed in Thailand. I went in and out of Vietnam a few times, but I was stationed in Thailand. I went down to Texas and did the John Wayne training, the shooting at the pop-ups and all this stuff. But basically, our task was to support the combat units, and so I mean, in Korea, I sat in the machine gun bunker for 2 or 3 nights because we were expecting problems that didn't happen, and we every once in a while we'd have what we considered a close call, but really I was not a combat soldier. I was more of a support person.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever do anything special for good luck?
Did I do anything special for good luck? No. I didn't rub my head or carry a 2-headed coin or something like this. No, I thought to some degree you made your own luck, mm-hmm. and some things you didn't have any control over. And no, I'm not a superstitious person, so I never really had the good luck charm thing,
When you were serving in either Korea or Vietnam, were you there during the winter
Oh, yeah.
at all? How was that different? Did it affect the soldiers? Like, were you guys prepared for?
In Korea, winters were absolutely cold and terrible. And we lived in a 12-man tent. I lived in a 12-man tent all the time I was there. And we had, the only heat we had was a little round pot-belly stove. Actually one at each end, I believe. And you could roast yourself by the stove and freeze if you got 3 feet away from it. It was at the time of the Korean War, the roads in Korea, the majority were still mud roads. You know, there were some highways, but most of it was just like mud roads. So in the winter, when there was rain and freezing and then thawing, it was like a quagmire. You know, just a mess. In Southeast Asia, in Thailand, I reported in there on the 28th of December, and I went down to Supply to draw the things that I needed, and they didn't have a blanket. They were out of blankets. They'd sent a bunch to be cleaned, and the guy told me they would due back the next day. I come back the next day and pick up my blanket. I lived in an NCO hooch, a non-commissioned officer hooch, where we had 2 men in a room. The walls of that room were screened. I mean, it had a little framework, you know, but basically it was a screen wall. There was no, you weren't boxing. And I stayed there until about the 20th of December the following year, and I never went back to get that blanket. So it never really got cold there. It did get hot. It got hot enough that our mechanics working on the flight line carried their tools out to their job in a bucket of water. But I never really got cold there.
Is there anything else that you want to add?
Not really, except that I enjoyed my 21 years and 23 days, 9 hours and 7 minutes in the Air Force. And I felt what I was doing was important to the nation, my family. So I'd do it again. I think that for an Arkansas farm boy, I spent just over 13 years overseas during my 21 years in the service, so I saw an awful lot of world that obviously I would have never seen. Enjoyed a lot of the world that I would never seen. In fact, you can look at the little list right there and you can see the places that I served. But no, I suppose that probably pretty well covers my experiences.
I don't have any more questions.
Any more questions?
No, I'm done.
Well, thank you for coming by and doing this.
What were some of your experiences in Vietnam?
Well, in Vietnam, I was just in and out of there. I didn't spend a lot of time there. But in Thailand, where I was stationed, we had some great experiences. We had some terrible experiences. A couple of interesting experiences that I find very interesting. We, a cobra was a very well-known snake. In fact, I believe they said if one bites you, lay down quick so you won't fall when you die, this type of thing. But they flare the back of their neck, and that flares out. And I saw this this Thai civilian down in my civil engineering compound had this cobra, and he had the cobra's head is here, and he had his hand behind it, and he was moving around like that, and I kept waiting for the cobra to bite him, but he didn't. But then we also, as I told you before, we lived in these screen wall hooches, and we had a little area where we did things like home cooking. I mean, you know, we did some of our own cooking. We cooked big pots of beans, big pots of chili, this type thing. Because there was about probably 30 NCOs in this one hooch, but we were 2 men to a room, you know. But anyway, some guys were doing some work back by our shower. To go to the shower, you had to come out of the hooch, down a couple of steps, down a sidewalk, and into the shower building. And a couple of workers were over there one day and uncovered a nest of these cobras. And they found all of them but Mama. So we were a little bit nervous. You know, Mama Cobra and her babies are gone. I was nervous, and so were a lot of other people. But we had this one tech sergeant. He wasn't scared of anything. He's not scared of any snake. Don't bother me. So that evening, there were a few of us sitting out on the common area there, and he went down to the shower. And he came back, and we heard him coming back. And I got over right next to the edge of the building, and when he stepped up for the first step out of those two that you had to step up on to get back on the porch that goes around the thing, I reached over and touched him on the back of the leg and yelled, "Snake." He threw shaving kit one direction, towel the other one, and jumped about 8 foot in the air. Never heard from him about how he wasn't afraid of snakes anymore. But we had a pet python, and I've got pictures of it somewhere, but I wouldn't try to find them because I don't know. But you know, they only eat about once a month. You feed them a whole big rat or a whole chicken or something alive, and they eat that, and that carries them for about the next month. But somewhere in that time, I guess they get hungry, because if you stick your hand in there in the cage, you know, we haven't had them in a cage. We'd take him out, let him crawl around over there. But if you stick your hand down in there, you better stick it in there carefully, because you want to get the back of his head before he gets the top. He's not poisonous, but you know, they have something on them that could cause an infection, like I don't know, whatever it is, I don't know. It was interesting. The bad things were some of our planes coming back shot up, some of our planes not coming back at all, some of our planes making it all the way back to the airfield and crashing because they couldn't land. They were shot up, and it's really, really hard to pick up the bodies of somebody that just went out that morning. You might see them take off, and that evening, that afternoon, you come back and you pick up the pieces of them. That was really the saddest experiences that we had. There's a lot of sad stories, but I think that's enough.
Whenever you were in Korea, did you guys have monsoons, or did it rain a lot?
Oh gosh, yes. It rained. I don't remember which months it rained. Pat, when did Gary say it rained so much in Korea when he was there?
I don't know.
My son-in-law was just a few years ago was there for a year. My son-in-law is following my footsteps. Right? He's retired from the Air Force. He's a postmaster. He even bought the same kind of car I drive. But yes, we did have an awful lot of rain, and it just wash the gullies out, and it was, the rice paddies were like up on the side of the hills and this type of thing. And they fertilized their rice paddies with human waste. So you really hated to see the rain come hard enough to start washing the junk down off the hill, but it did. Things were so much different there. And I guess they're still, my son-in-law said they have paved roads now and this type of thing, and even have sidewalks some places, but it's still not a totally modern country, but it was interesting. I didn't go any place that wasn't interesting.
Were you around a lot of villages with villagers?
There was a village right out probably 100 yards from our front gate, and there were some scattered back in the hill. But right down in the area where we were, that was the only one close by, because we had all the land kind of surrounding was bomb revetments. And I guess those Korean people didn't want to live close to those bomb revetments. But we'd get a shipload of bombs, and we had to store them until we shipped them north to wherever the fighters or the bombers were located. So we took up an awful lot of the space, and that we were right on the shore of the Japanese Sea. And there's probably, and I can't remember for sure, but I'd say other than the little village right down the end of the road from our base, it was probably 6-7 miles to the next one, or maybe 10 to the next one. And I'm guessing it's been a while now.
Were you guys allowed to go visit? Like, did you ever go to the villages?
Oh yeah, we went out to the village. We went back to Busan. Now we'd have to have a reason for going back to Busan. We went back there on business, but yeah, you could go out to the village. And
were they happy to see you guys, or did they not?
Yeah, I think they were, because this was a situation where North Vietnam had attacked South Vietnam, and we were in South Vietnam. It wasn't like in Vietnam where you had South Vietnam Viet Cong fighting and killing their own people, But yeah, I think they were. I think they were happy to see us, and the people were friendly. Yeah, going into a village, the smell was terrible. They ate a lot of fish, and the way they cooked it was lay it up on the tin roof and let the sun cook it for 2 or 3 days. And they had kimchi, which was, I thought, some of the most foul-smelling stuff that I ever saw, but they loved it. So yeah, I was glad to come home there. We spent a tour in Turkey where things were a little bit different. My wife loved it over there. She went with me there, and she loved it. They had these just like a shopping center and shacks there, where you could buy anything in the world. I mean, you could buy everything from a needle to a new Rolls Royce if you wanted. And the shopping experience there was totally different. When she go down to a butcher store down in the village, and I don't know if you ever bought anything from the butcher store or not, but you used to go with this other lady down there. And you walk in, you can't just go in and say, I would like this and this and that. You come in, they pour you a cup of tea and sit you down at a little table, and you have an enjoyable experience of drinking your tea and talking to the people, and then you go ahead and do your business. And in these little store things that had just about everything in the world, if you went in to visit these people, and you saw something you liked, and you asked them what the price, and he told you bought it, they didn't care if you ever came back. You took the pleasure out of the shopping for them. They wanted to negotiate, to bargain, to argue prices with you, and that was a lot of fun. My wife, like I said, my wife really enjoyed that. She enjoyed being there. It was quite an experience. And we were stationed in England twice. Well, I was stationed there twice. She was there when I got there the first time, and then in the South Pacific and a number of places in the United States. So it was an interesting career. I enjoyed it, and I'd do it again.
Did you ever have to go into North Korea?
No,
ever?
no. The closest I ever went to North Korea was probably 50 miles south of the demarcation area. I didn't. In fact, we weren't supposed to be in North Korea at all. As far as I know, our troops were supposed to stop at the demilitarized zone, which was fine with me. I was with MacArthur. I believed that we should have gone ahead and done the job at the time, but that wasn't my decision. Obviously, it wasn't his, because Truman fired him, you know. But I did not go to North Korea, and I'm glad.
I don't have any more questions.
We're gonna quit now, are we?
Were you on a South Pacific island?
Oh yes, oh yes. I went to Johnson Island, which was 800 miles from Hawaii, more than once. In fact, I went there probably 4 or 5 times. I'd go there supposed to have been for 90 days, and then come back to Vandenberg Air Force Base in California for 6 months, and then back for 90 more days. We had 3 rotational crews. We were a missile test unit out there. We were testing new and wonderful things for the military, for the government, and it was something else. It was a little, I say, 3/4 by wound up being probably a 1.5 1.25 long, and when you're up there coming down to it and you see it, it looks like a postage stamp setting out of the water, and the pilots would go way out past it and then turn around and come back and line up perfectly and hit that runway right at the beginning so he didn't run out of room at the other end. Well, there was nothing there. We had really, there was a club that was there, an all services club, but we had a lot of time on our hands, because until it was time to fire a missile, we just maintained them, and they didn't take that much maintenance. So we built ourselves a softball field. We built a miniature golf course. We built tennis courts, volleyball court, and just kind of made our own fun, you know. We didn't have, this rotational crew was the only military there. Our security was U.S. Marshals, and we had some Hawaiian construction crews out there, but and we had did some interesting things there. We, like I say, when we fired a missile for the next 14 days, we didn't sleep much. We worked, putting another one in place and cleaning up and all that. But other than that, it was pretty quiet, and we had a lot of fun with our homemade. And we had the one great thing that the Air Force did for us. They put a telephone that was a hotline back to Los Angeles that tied into a line back to our base, so we could talk to our family 3 or 4 times a week if we wanted. And And I did. I talked to my family. My shop was right at the bottom of the stairs from where the telephone was. So I was usually the first one up there when they opened it. And I'd get a chance to talk to my family frequently. I have another humorous story if you like. We were there and our time was up and it's time to go home, and they couldn't find us an airplane. It was during the build-up for Vietnam, and they couldn't find us an airplane. And we're sitting waiting. No airplane. So we were having a lot of fun out of the thing. We had our own little radio station. So somebody called the radio station and dedicated a song to our commander called I Want to Go Home. And the commander was just as nice as we were. He called a radio station and donated a song to the troops. You're in the jailhouse now. and these things went on. And when we finally heard that we had a plane coming, and the morning it was going to be there, the day before, these two young, well, they weren't that young, they weren't a lot younger than me, but anyway, these two guys come running into my room, my cubicle up in the barracks, and said, Gwen, somebody told me you can operate a Garwood crane, a 20-ton crane. And I said, well, yes. Okay, we want to do something. What's that? Well, tonight we want to put the commander's Jeep up on top of the barracks. I said, okay, He said, you don't have to do anything but operate the crane. We'll drive it over there and we'll take it away when it's up and all that. It's okay, I'll do it. Well, as far as I knew, only 3 of us knew about it. The 2 guys that came in there and myself. But late that afternoon, as was usual, we had a debriefing. And the commander spoke to all the troops before they went home. And he went through all the debriefing things, and then he said, I have one thing to add, man. He said, I've heard a rumor that if I can't find my Jeep in the morning, I should probably look on top of one of the barracks. And he stopped and he looked at each of these other 2 guys and me directly. He said, I really wouldn't advise that. He said, because if my Jeep is on top of the barracks when the plane lands, there's going to be about 3 guys in this unit that stays here and help me get it down. You know what we did, the 3 of us that night? We guarded his Jeep to make sure nobody fooled with it. But we had other experiences there that we used to take old equipment that was past its life expectancy and had wear out problem from that, put it on a barge and take it out 4 or 5 miles out from the island and set a charge in it and explode it and let everything sink. Well, they had an amphibious duck. I don't know if you know what an amphibious duck, but it's like a big truck, but it'll go cross land and into the water. The only thing really badly wrong with it was the body of it. And that was due to go for the ride. And my commander came in my office and he said, I heard you know how to weld. And I said, well, you heard wrong, sir. And he said, I heard you a welder. And I said, you heard wrong, I'm not a welder. He said, okay. Somebody told me they'd seen you welding something back in the States. And I said, okay, I can weld, but I'm not a welder. He said, have I got a deal for you? He said, what if I relieve you of all duties until you're finished, provide sheet metal to do this job and have you completely recover this amphibious duck? So that's a great idea. I'll do it, if. I said, there's 2 conditions. And what's this? I said, one is I get to pick my helper, and the other is somebody brings me a cold beer at least once a day. He said, okay, I'll do that. And so help me, he did. Every day, about 10:30, 11 o'clock, he'd ride his little service cycle up there with 2 beers in it and hand them to us, But anyway, we worked on that thing. We put sheet metal all around it, sealed everything just beautifully, and finally came the big day. We could put that jewel in the water. Well, we had one of the contractors with his big crane come and set it in the water for us. And the guy that had been working with me and myself were in it when they set it in the water. And it was just beautiful. And all of a sudden I heard water. And we started looking, and there's a drive shaft that comes up into the, through the body, and it looked beautiful. But the seal was gone, and water was coming in, and this thing was going to sink. This crane had already gone back down the other end of the island. So there was some like telephone poles laying there, and we had those guys line about 3 or 4 of them up, hook our little wrecker to the thing with the hook, and pull it up on there, and got it up far enough in the air that we could get under there and work on that thing. So we got under there, we pulled that seal out, repacked that jewel, re-lubricated it, added a little bit of packing to it, put it back, set it back out in the water, and it worked beautifully. I mean, it really worked beautifully this time. So, being the guy that built it, I had the opportunity for first use, so I took a bunch of guys out about a couple of miles from the island, and still inside the reef, but there was a plane had gone down out there in World War II, and you could see it. You could see the entire plane and it was down Lord knows how many feet. But I took these divers out to dive down, and so we took them out there and they dived down. And I wasn't a diver, but I jumped off and swam around a little bit in the water now. And when they were ready, finished, I took them back in. But right near where we were, there was a break in the reef. And the next morning, we had picket boats go around and around the island all the time. 24 hours a day, these picket boats went around. And but they'd go in 4-hour shifts. They'd change boats every 4 hours. So if you wanted to go fishing for 4 hours, you'd go fishing. And I did the next morning. And just as we passed that break in the reef, where I had been swimming the day before, I saw a school of probably 50 shark. The last time this fat boy went my way. I said, if they're going to get me, they're going to have to get sand in their toes because they're going to have to come up on this island to get me. I didn't swim out there anymore. But we had Navy demolition people out there blowing channels. They carried a little rod about that long with a small explosive on the end of it to scare sharks away. And I mean, they went out there with their Tarzan outfits on and swam, did a lot of underwater thing, and we never lost one. But I didn't have enough faith to get me in the water.
I just have 2 more questions. How old were you when you first entered?
When I entered the service, I was 17 years old.
And how old were you when you went to,
I was 18 when I went to Korea, and I was 35, 36, I don't know, in my 30s anyway when I went to Vietnam, to Southeast Asia.
And whenever you retired, did you have like a title? What was
my title?
Yeah.
Well, my last title, I guess, would have been, you had a different job, depending on the needs where you went. But my last assignment, I was superintendent of operations for civil engineering in England. And it was, I worked directly for the civil engineer, and we had, even though the British did the majority of the work there, we still had a supervisor for each crew. You know, we had roads and grounds, fuels, power production, etc. Each had a supervisor, and then you had a superintendent. So that was my last assignment. Prior to that, I was first sergeant. I was willing to do almost anything because everything I considered an experience worthwhile. So I did a number of different jobs. Probably the missile thing was probably most interesting. That's what I was doing in Turkey. And I taught the Jupiter missile to the Turkish Air Force. And we worked with the Turkish Air Force, you know, one-on-one, and then we had classes. And it was pretty interesting. I enjoyed it. But then yeah, I'm sure that you might have heard of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when that happened, Mr. Kennedy didn't give up anything. It was just coincidental that we all came home from Turkey. We tore down our missiles and cut the platinum and gold and silver out of the nose cone and wrapped primer cord around them and blew them up, and then we came home. So I'm sure it had nothing to do with that. It just, timing just seemed that way. But yeah, I had a very interesting career. I had a varied career, very interesting. And I would take anything for it. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
You're absolutely welcome. It's been my pleasure.